Welcome to Kaleidoscope. Let's talk. Nobody writes a historical novel like he does. Sebastian Faulks is a bona fide genius of literature, and he was at the Galle Literary Festival this year. He's the author of The Girl at the Lion D'Or, Birdsong, Charlotte Gray, and of course numerous other titles. His most recent is The Seventh Son. He even wrote a James Bond continuation, Devil May Care, and a continuation of the Wodehouse Jeeves series, Jeeves and the Wedding Bells. Sebastian was at one point a journalist and worked at The Independent, The Daily Telegraph and The Sunday Telegraph. He's also regularly on BBC's Radio 4's The Right Stuff, Literary Quiz, and a host of other things. He's been to Sri Lanka several times already, first in 1981 to play cricket. He's a literary superstar and he's here on Let's Talk today. So you were first here in 1981 to play cricket.
That's correct.
How has Sri Lanka changed since then?
Between 1981 and now, obviously the country's been through an extremely turbulent and difficult time, which is not really reflected in, as a tourist, as a visitor, your day-to-day experience. Though there was a time about 6 years ago when I was here for a festival and we went up to Jaffna in the north, which was still very clearly suffering from the aftermath of war. But I must say, down here in Galle, the world seems completely unchanged. The boats, the sea, the fish, the people, the lovely weather, so I'm enjoying it.
I love the way you brought in the sea, the fish, the people. You obviously love fish.
Well, I should have put the people first, really, shouldn't I?
Okay. So how did cricket transcend into writing?
Well, I was never a professional cricketer. I was only an amateur club cricketer. And it's a game which meant a great deal to me as a child. And then I played, and I only gave up about 2 years ago when my eyesight became too bad. But I think cricket it is a great game. I mean, it's the most intellectual physical game, so it's the physical equivalent of chess, really. To me, it has been a way of contemplating the shortness of life and the unfairness of life and the brevity of life. But it's also been a way of examining characters, and above all it's been a source of enormous friendship and great humour. And you come to the other side of the world, to India or Sri Lanka, and you find you have in common with people something that you might not otherwise have in common. The only problem with coming to India and Sri Lanka is that the players are very good, and so we never seem to win any games.
So what did you have to keep in mind when writing the continuations like you did for the James Bond series as well as the Wodehouse series, Jeeves? What are the challenges you actually came across when writing these, given that they've already been done and you were doing a continuation?
The James Bond book was a very surprising commission because I don't write thrillers and I don't read thrillers. So I was very surprised to be asked. But I spoke to the Fleming family quite a lot and they were very encouraging. So I said, well, I will write an outline and see what you think. And I said, but it has to be set back in the 60s. I don't want to write it in the modern day. And they said, that's fine. And so we sort of went through it together, and I would do a little chapter and show it to them. And they say, no, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. But to me, the big challenge of that was to create a complicated plot, because my own books don't have much in the way of plot. They're more about people's lives as they change, as they get older. There are no guns and villains and double crossing and car chases. So all that world was completely unfamiliar to me. So that was the challenge. And to make a complicated thriller plot is harder than it looks. It's like, if all the pieces fit together, it was interesting. But that was the challenge with that. The challenge with the P.G. Wodehouse book was more to do with the style, because Ian Fleming's style is not very hard to imitate. But P.G. Wodehouse's style is very hard to imitate because it is so fragile and so light and so complicated. Well, just because it's comic about a ridiculous world that never existed, it doesn't mean to say that it's easy. So that was a different challenge, to hear the music in my voice, in my head, and to reproduce his rhythms and his wit.
When you write historical novels, what are the fundamentals that you have to keep in mind when putting this down?
I don't really think that there's a difference between novels set in the past and novels set in the future. My most recent novel, The Seventh Son, begins in 2030 and it ends in 2055. So it's set mostly in the 2040s, whereas if you look at a book like Charlotte Gray, it's set in the 1940s. But to me, they're both just novels. And for the background with one, with the past, you can do as much research as you like, but if you do too much, you end up writing a sort of school essay and shoving in everything you've discovered. You have to remember it's about people, it's about their lives, it's about drama. With the future, there's no research to do because nobody knows what it's going to be like. So in a way, it's much easier.
Has the market changed for novels, the readership, the way it is sold, and all, everything that goes with novel writing, novel marketing, novel publishing? Has it changed over the years?
Yes, it has. When I first started writing in the early 80s, there was very little market for the kind of book that I was writing, which is quite a serious literary book. And all the sort of successful British authors at that time, they all had other jobs, or their husbands or their wives had other jobs. You couldn't really make a living from it. And then I think in the sort of between about 1985 and 2005, there was a huge boom in Britain and Europe for quite serious and yet readable books. This was largely to do with the way they were sold. So they were piled high. They were sold as in a supermarket. So it was a fantastic time to be writing. And then I think now that has changed again, and the volume of books has remained. The volume of books sold is about the same, but it clusters now around very few books, which are a lot to do with people who are famous from the internet or famous from television. So again, the kind of book I write had its 20-year boom, which was wonderful, but now it's sort of coming back to earth a bit.
What do you think of e-books? Are they eventually going to replace the much-loved paper?
It doesn't seem so, no. They seem to sit alongside quite well. I mean, I don't use them much. Unless I'm traveling somewhere, then you can get 10 books on your little device. But people's predictions of all these things are wrong. People always said the hardback book would disappear and it would be straight away paperback. But in the United States, it's the paperback which has disappeared. So you have hardback and ebook, and sometimes they will do a paperback and sometimes they won't. So it's impossible to predict, but it seems to me at the moment that e-books sit quite happily alongside paper books.
So does your approach to writing change from book to book, or do you have sort of an evergreen method that you follow?
Every time you sit down to write a new book, you feel like a beginner and you have forgotten everything you did before. And sometimes I go back to the shelf and I take out an earlier book and I look at it and think, God, that's good. How did I do that? Or I might turn to another page and think, oh, that's not great. Or no, there's a word repeated 3 lines apart here. That's hopeless. But it's a weird thing. You never seem to, you never start a book thinking, I know what I'm doing. This is easy. Here we go. Every time as you stare at it, you think, what am I doing? No one's going to believe this. This is ridiculously difficult. But I think what helps you with every book is finding the tone of voice for that book. And every book has a different tone of voice, depending on whether it's in the first person or the third person, what period it's set. But once you've found the tone of voice, it may be a little ironic, a little comic, it may be rather long and solemn. It doesn't really matter what it is, but once you've found that, you're away.
Have you ever had plots gone wrong or things going wrong while you've been in the writing process?
Not since the early days. I mean, before I was published, I wrote 2 or 3 books which I gave up halfway through. I didn't know where they were going and I hadn't sufficiently planned them. But writing a novel, a serious novel of 300 pages is a big effort, intellectually, emotionally, and almost physically. Especially if you have a lot of research, it takes a lot of commitment, and I won't embark on it unless I'm fairly sure I know where I'm going. Having said which, it does change a bit from time to time. Every book is different, but I wouldn't really get beyond 10,000 words unless I was really certain I knew what I was doing.
Your latest book has been described as near future. It's like you're moving through time. Any insights about life and the time you've learned through your writing endeavors?
What makes a lot of stories moving or poignant is the sense that the characters have only one chance. and they need to make the right choices, to find the right people to be with, and so on. But time will laugh at us all in the end, and of course as you get older time begins to accelerate. It's something that's very hard to explain to a young person. I remember as a child, between the ages of 6 and 7, that took about 20 years, but the age between 61 and 62 took about 5 minutes.
If you were to pick, what is your favorite novel? Yours, what you've authored?
I would probably say Human Traces, because it was the longest and most serious and took everything out of me. But Birdsong, which is my most famous book, some people think you must think that your big hit is sort of like a millstone around your neck. I don't think of it like that. I think of it like the locomotive that pulls the train. So I'm happy with that. And my new book, The Seventh Son, everyone will love that.
What is your most favorite thing about our country?
The landscape, the people, the food. I'm very fond of Sri Lankan food. And also the memories of when I first came here. Colombo was the first city in Asia that I'd ever been to. And I remember staying in a very run-down little hotel on the Gaul Road, the wrong end of the Gaul Road. But from the moment I arrived, I felt at home in an odd way. And so that's why I've been back so many times.
Sebastian, lovely to have you on the show and lovely to have you back here in Sri Lanka at the Goa Literary Festival.
My pleasure.
Kaleidoscope is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us if you want to know more about us.